Good morning, church. Take your Bible and open it to Matthew chapter 14, if you will, please. Go to Matthew's biography and the 14th chapter. Please raise your hand if you took driver's ed in high school. Look at all the hands. Man, all kinds of people. I did not take driver's ed in high school because they didn't offer it. I'm not sure I would have taken it anyway because I started driving vehicles at a very early age, believe it or not. You know, my dad stuck me on a riding lawnmower when I was about 7 or 8. That's why I'm missing 3 toes from my right foot. Just kidding. I was driving go-karts when I was a child. At the age of 9 and 10, I would drive our cars, our automobiles around our property with little problem. I learned how to negotiate the size of the vehicle and how to control the vehicle when I was just a kid. Now, my sister struggled quite a bit. Now, what I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with my being a man and her being a woman. Just so you know, I'm not a sexist. It has everything to do, however, with my growing up driving vehicles, and she didn't, frankly. Dad was responsible for the driver's ed in our household. I suppose it falls on every parent the responsibility to teach their children how to drive. And if you're a parent teaching your child or your teenager how to drive, oh, my heart goes out to you. I have taught teenagers how to drive, and it is anything but easy. So I'm cheering for you because I know how difficult it is. My dad put a lot of time in teaching my sister to drive because she was at a little bit of a disadvantage. He bought her a Nissan Maxima, which was a 4-door kind of sporty sedan, and she was going to go to college up in Greenville, South Carolina. So they decided to take a trip together, just my dad and my sister. They're going to drive about 5.5 hours from Metter up to Greenville and then come back. The idea was that she would drive on the way up and he would give her advice and pointers. And then they'd look at the school and then he would drive on the way back. Well, they'd travel up 121 through Augusta and then Newberry. They'd hit the interstate and wind up in Greenville. On one of those 2-lane roads, my sister was driving and they came upon a large group of buzzards on the side of the road. They were picking at a dead animal. So my sister sees this and doesn't really know what to do. So she begins slowing down until finally she stops right there in her lane. And she got scolded for it. My dad said, "Paula, you can't stop in the middle of the road. Somebody's going to come up behind you and hit you from behind. Those birds will get out of your way. Just slow down and hold it steady next time." So she sped up and off they went. Now, on the way home, believe it or not, they came across another large group of buzzards on the side of the road. This time my father's driving. And the little light goes off in the back of his head. I'm going to show her what I'm talking about. I'm going to teach her a valuable lesson about how to handle yourself when you're driving your car on a 2-lane, there's traffic in the oncoming lane, and there's a group of buzzards at the shoulder of the road. He says, "Now watch, Paula. Pay close attention to what I'm about to do. You don't have to stop. You just slow down and you hold it steady." And right about that time, wham, he hit 2 of the buzzards. Dislodged the headlight, crumpled the front fender, $1,400 of damage to my sister's car, all while they were on a driving lesson. Several weeks ago, we opened up a brand new series of messages entitled The Principle of the Path. It is based on the book bearing the same title written by Andy Stanley. The principle of the path is as follows. It is your direction, not your intention, that determines your destination. It is your direction in life, not your intention, that determines your destination. It is your direction in your marriage, not your hopes, not your dreams, that determines your destination in your marriage. It is your direction with your family finances, not your prayers. I don't care how many goals you've written down. It is your direction, not your intention, that determines your destination. One of the driving lessons that I received from my dad that still is with me to this day has to do with how to handle yourself on a 2-lane at night regarding oncoming traffic. Have you ever noticed that at night, if you're driving on a 2-lane and a country road and a car comes around the curve, especially if they have their bright lights on, you know, they've got their bright lights on, how your eyes will become fixated with those lights? You'll start like staring at those lights. You got to be very careful if you're going to do that. That's not the best way to handle it. If they've got their bright lights on and maybe you kind of flash them a couple of times and they don't change, my dad taught me, here's what you do, Michael. You focus your eyes, you give your attention to the white line on the shoulder of the road in your lane. If you'll keep your car on that white line, those lights in the oncoming lane, they're not going to bother you. And sure enough, it works. It keeps you from drifting in the oncoming lane. Because that's one of the strange things about this. If you see it and you start looking that way, you'll tend to steer that way as well. That's why you don't want to look at the lights in the car in the oncoming lane when you're driving at night. Because if you look that way, you'll tend to steer that way. Maybe you've been driving in the country and your wife points out something on the right. Michael, look at those deer. Look at all the deer in that field. Sure enough, if I look and if they capture my attention, it won't be long. I'll start steering that way. I'll start veering off the road. I have run off the road more than once looking at something off to my right or off to my left. It's why when you're driving, especially through unfamiliar territory, and there's a beautiful farmhouse up on the hill, and your wife says, Michael, check that out. That place is beautiful. You can look, but only look once and then put your eyes back on the road, because if you look that way, you'll tend to steer that way as well. Once something grabs your attention, in some strange way, we tend to gravitate toward it. Now, the message today attempts to answer a question that we posed back in message number 2. Several weeks ago, remember we talked about this idea. Why is it that we so often choose paths that do not lead to where we want to go? I mean, what's that all about? Why is it that in life we often choose relational paths that don't take us where we want to go, or financial paths, or career paths, or marriage paths, or family paths that lead us to places we don't want to go? Making it even worse, why is it that we so often choose paths that lead us to places we don't want to go? A single person who wants to be happily married one day with a family, children of her own, but in high school or college, she chooses relational paths by the way she dates, by the people she dates, that don't lead to that destination. Why do we do this? Couples who long for financial freedom. One day they want to reach the destination of being debt-free. They want to live without that financial stress and pressure. But early in their marriage, unfortunately, they choose a path that leads to financial burden or even financial bondage. Why do we do it? Students in high school or college who choose or hope one day to arrive at a destination, a career path, if you will, that's rewarding, that's fulfilling, that's satisfying. But in high school or college, they choose paths that don't take them there. Why do we do it? It's ironic, it's strange, but it's true. Why would we ever choose a path that leads us to a place we really don't want to go? Here's why. And it's the subject of the message today. I'll put it on the screen. Whatever gets our attention is going to influence our direction, and that ultimately determines our destination. Okay? Just like driving in your car, whatever gets our attention is going to influence our direction, and that ultimately determines our destination. That's why you can't stare at the group of turkeys in the field off to your right while you're driving 60 miles an hour down the highway. That's why you can't become focused on that beautiful home on the hillside when you're driving through unfamiliar territory. Because whatever gets your attention is going to influence your direction. That's why we so often wind up in destinations that we do not appreciate, we did not intend. It's because we chose a path that would take us there. What put us on that path? Something grabbed our attention. Remember Proverbs 4 and verse 26. We've talked about this verse every time we've been together. Ponder the path of your feet, Solomon wrote. Then all your ways will be sure. Ponder the path of your feet. That's like saying, pay attention to the road ahead. That's like saying, keep your eyes on the path. That's like saying, the path ahead should have your full attention. Don't be distracted. Why? Here it is again. Because whatever gets our attention is going to influence our direction and ultimately determine our destination. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone or something grab your attention or capture your attention? Those are interesting terms, in my opinion. There's usually a lot of emotion associated with the process of something grabbing your attention or capturing your attention. There's a feeling that goes along with it. Some of you probably drove to church today in a car that at one time it grabbed your attention. You might go home to a house today that at one time grabbed your attention. You might sit down at a restaurant this afternoon and order something because of a picture on the menu that grabbed your attention. My poor father has eaten at Mexican restaurants for 50 plus years, and he's never once gotten what he thought he ordered. Unless there's a picture and he can point to it and say, that's what I want. When something grabs our attention, there's typically an emotion that's associated with that new car or that new house or something we want to eat. Maybe you're going to lay down tonight with a person you married years ago who at one time grabbed your attention. Many years ago, when I first moved from Florida to Georgia, I wasn't in a really good place, quite frankly. I was discouraged. I felt like God had let me down. I was angry. I never gave up on my faith, but in my opinion, God had some explaining to do because my life had wound up at a destination that I didn't choose, and I was very unhappy with it. I didn't go to church because at that time in my life, I didn't think I needed church. I was skeptical of church anyway. My dad convinced me to come one Sunday. I think it was a special Sunday like Mother's Day or Easter. He twisted my arm. He said, Michael, go to church just for your mother. Go to church. So I went to a small church in Metter where they were attending. I sat down next to my father and my mother, and the man on the stage said, everybody stand, turn around and shake hands with your neighbor. When I turned around, I locked eyes with Amy, and she captured my attention. Little did I know that following my first date with Amy, she was going to greatly influence my direction, my financial path, my career path, my relational path, all because she captured my attention. Notice I didn't say give. I didn't give her my attention. Nobody tapped me on the shoulder and said, Michael, give your attention to the pretty blonde behind you. Pay attention to the cute girl behind you. It wasn't about giving or paying. She captured my attention, and oh, by the way, she refused to give it back. See? And once she captured my attention, she won my affection, and that immediately altered my direction. Advertisers are professionals at this. If you're an advertiser, it's your goal to capture someone's attention. You use images, you use music, you use stories. If something pops up on your phone or a commercial on the television, the goal of that advertisement is to create an emotion that captures or grabs your attention. I have a dog at home. Many of you are familiar with Roxy. Roxy is about a 150-pound Italian Mastiff. Her head is almost as big as a basketball. She's a big, big girl, a full-figured girl, we like to say. Roxy is a slave to her stomach. I can influence that large dog's direction, strong as she is, independent as she is, using food. Food captures her attention. And once I've got her attention, I can influence her direction. But she's a dog. She's a slave to her stomach. She has no choice. You and I do have a choice. You see, we can choose to give our attention to anything we believe to be worthwhile or beneficial to our path. That means that we can use this principle I'm describing today to our advantage, to our benefit. We can leverage this idea in our favor. Here it is. This is big. The idea works both for us as well as against us. You see, I can use this principle to benefit myself in all kinds of ways because whatever I choose to give my attention to is going to influence my direction. And my direction determines my destination. It may not necessarily grab my attention or capture my attention because it may not have the same emotional component of things that do. But whatever I choose to give my attention to whatever I pay attention can influence my direction. I'll get the same result. That's fantastic to me. Here's what that means. That means that when I give attention to my health, I can improve my health. That means when I give attention to my financial well-being, I can better my financial well-being. That means when I give attention to my marriage, I can strengthen my marriage. When I give attention to my children's future, I can fortify their future. Now, Matthew is one of 4 biographers in your New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew is the first. In Matthew chapter 14, the author gives us a great account of an event that occurred in the life of Jesus with his disciples. You are probably aware that Jesus walked on water, right? Most people know that. What you may not know is that he wasn't the only one. Peter walked on water as well, at least for a little while. The message of Matthew 14 is the message, the principle that I'm trying to describe today. As long as Peter gave his attention to Jesus, he was fine. But when the wind and the waves captured or grabbed his attention, that's when he began to sink. Look at verse 22 of Matthew 14. Matthew writes, "Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side." This has been a very, very long day in the life of Jesus and his disciples. Earlier in the passage, we find out that they've just fed 5,000 people. Actually, the text says they fed 5,000 men. They probably fed upwards of 10,000 people. That in itself was a huge ordeal. But Jesus has been teaching all day and speaking all day. Jesus was healing the sick. They brought their wounded and they're ill and they're sick from miles around. And Jesus spent time with every one of them. By the time the sun is going down, Jesus is exhausted. They're on the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus puts them in a boat and says, "You guys go on ahead. I need some alone time." Look at verse 23. After he had dismissed them, he went up to the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. I don't know if you've ever been on the water at night when the weather changes, but it's not a comfortable situation, especially if you're in a small boat. Now, I'm no big fisherman, but I've been on the water plenty of times at night, and a storm's come up, or the winds come up, and the waves are choppy, and they're smashing over the front of the boat, and you're just trying to get back to land. That is a very uncomfortable situation. All right? That's the situation the disciples are in. Verse 25, shortly before dawn, so they've been in that situation all night. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said. And they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It's me. It's me." In other words, let me have your attention. Pay attention to me. You know me. You know who I am. Don't look at the waves. Don't consider the wind. It's me. Don't be afraid. Verse 28. "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Well, come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. I think it's safe to assume at this moment, Jesus has Peter's full and undivided attention. But it doesn't last. Watch. "But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me.'" Something's changed. Jesus, at one point, had Peter's undivided attention, but the wind and the waves, his circumstance, captured his attention. Verse 31, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" Why did you doubt? That's a good question. When you were in college and you wanted to find the right guy, but it took a long time, and so you just gave yourself to anybody, why did you doubt? When you were first married and and you wanted to get on a financial path that was going to lead to independence and freedom, but that was going to take too long, and it felt too good to buy new stuff. Why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? When you were struggling to establish your business or get your career started on the right track, and you felt like nobody appreciated the extra time you were putting in, so you began to just let it go. Why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? That's a good question. Why do we allow things that aren't necessarily good for us to capture our attention? Here's why. Now, it takes a lot of words, but follow me. I'll put it on the screen. It's because emotion fuels the things that capture my attention. But intention, focus, purpose fuels the decision to give my attention to the right things. And that's the difference. Did you catch that? The reason I doubt, the reason I choose a path, the reason I'm influenced by the things that grab my attention, which may or may not be any good for me, is because there's always an emotion that's associated with it. There's an emotion, a feeling that's associated with those things that grab our attention. Emotion fuels the things that capture my attention, but intention, purpose, focus, fuels the decision to give my attention to the right things. The waves and the wind caught Peter's attention. That's because he was afraid. Fear is a powerful motivator. Anxiety is a powerful motivator. There is a feeling that's associated with situations that are impending or unknown or difficult. There are also strong feelings associated with getting a new car. Strong feelings associated with moving into a bigger, nicer house. Strong feelings associated with an ice cream sundae even. Those feelings are strong and they often need to be held in check. How do you hold them in check? Let me illustrate. If I went home today and spent 2.5 hours on autotrader.com, it wouldn't be long before an emotion would begin to rise in me. I'd love to own a new Ford Bronco. I'd love to own it, especially when the two-door comes out. I want one so badly. Believe it or not, I had an old Bronco earlier in my life, and I can't believe I ever got rid of it. Now they've come out with this new one, new technology, but it looks like the old one. I want one so bad. It would only take a couple hours on Car Gurus or Auto Trader, and I'd begin to feel that emotion. That emotion needs to be held in check. You see? If I didn't choose to give my attention to my family's budget, to mine and Amy's financial well-being, I couldn't control that emotion. I'd be shopping for a new Bronco every afternoon. My wife, Amy, fit as she is, healthy as she is, could live on donuts, cookies, ice cream, and candy bars. She's got the sweet tooth in our house. She could have it breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The reason she doesn't is because she's chosen to give her attention to exercise. And you know what's remarkable about all the time she spends on the treadmill or in the gym? When she's focused on the exercise, it's much easier to keep those desires for sweets in check. That's the way that works. Now look, don't look at me as if I'm the only one that wants to buy a new car or likes sweets. Some of you could go home this afternoon and spend 2 hours on Zillow, and after a few minutes, you'd feel one of two emotions about all the property and all the houses that are for sale in our area. You'd either feel joy and anticipation over the possibility of potentially moving into a bigger, nicer, newer house, or you'd feel disgust and disappointment over the tiny little cramped place you live in now, right? There's always an emotion that's associated with the things that capture our attention. How do we hold those emotions in check? Here it is. I'll put it on the screen. The emotions associated with things that capture my attention are held in check by my intention. There it is again. My purpose to give my attention to the things that really matter. That's how you do it. The only way I can control the emotion that wells up inside of me when I spot something, see something that grabs my attention is to make sure I've already given my attention, because I've been decisive in doing so. It is my intention to give my attention to the things that matter the most. Now we're getting somewhere. You see, when I choose to give my attention to something that's good for me, or something that's more important than a new car or a bigger house, it becomes more difficult then for my attention to be captured by something that isn't. Peter would have been fine if he had continued to pay attention to Jesus. So if I give my attention to the gym and regular exercise, I've given my attention to the gym, regular exercise, then it becomes more difficult for my attention to be captured by something that isn't good for me. Now listen, church, I'm not trying to fool anybody. I'm not saying this is easy, but I'm saying it's doable. And I'm saying what you'll find is it gets easier with each intentional decision. The first time I decide to give my attention to something meaningful, it may be really tough. But when I start to reap the benefits from that decision, the next time isn't so hard. The next time isn't so difficult. That's because, again, there's an emotion that's associated with the things that capture my attention, but there's usually no emotion associated with my decision or my intention to give my attention to something that's good for me. In fact, there's usually a cost. That's why the term pay attention exists. Pay attention. Pay implies cost. Unless you are in high school, it's probably been a very long time since anyone's ever told you to pay attention. I can't remember the last time someone told me, Michael, pay attention. The reason when I was in school that I didn't want to pay attention was because of the cost associated with doing so. If I pay attention in class, I'm going to miss all the funny stuff my buddy's doing on the back row. I'm going to miss the cute girl that's sitting in the row next to me. If I pay attention, if I have to give my attention to something that is not associated with a positive emotion, at least as I see it, I fear it's going to cost me something. Here's the reality, church. It's really not. It's really not. It's just postponing the reward. If I pay attention today, it costs me something now, but I get something for it later. If I pay attention to my marriage starts improving tomorrow. If I pay attention in class, I graduate with good grades and more opportunity. If I pay attention to my budget, eventually I live with less stress and more financial options. Psalm 119, verse 37, powerful verse. Check this out. The psalmist wrote, "Turn my eyes away from worthless things." Don't misunderstand. Nothing wrong with buying new cars, buying bigger houses. Nothing wrong with taking vacations. Nothing wrong with fine dining. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But in the grand scheme of things, they're worthless compared to the health and well-being of your marriage, of your family, of your financial future. The psalmist said, "Turn my eyes away from worthless things. Preserve my life according to your word." Do you know that in the Bible, the eye is the gate to the body? If you keep your eye clean, your body will remain clean. The eye is what lets in the good and the bad to the body according to the Bible. What a powerful verse. The psalmist is saying, Lord, keep me from being distracted by things that aren't necessarily good for me. The psalmist is saying, I want my eyes fixed on the things that really matter. And if I have time and money and resources to buy a new car, I will. If we can move into a bigger house, I will. But what matters most to me is I want to keep my eyes off the worthless things, because that's the way my life is preserved. That's the way it's bettered. That's the way it improves. Now, I end with a question. What's got your attention? Remember, the reason this is so important is because whatever gets your attention is going to influence your direction. And your direction is what's going to determine your destination. So I ask you, what's got your attention? What's grabbed your attention that may be hurting you? Maybe hurting your marriage? Maybe hurting your future? Conversely, What should you give your attention to that would benefit you, that would strengthen you? Just imagine for a moment a church like this one, full of hundreds of people whose eyes are fixed on the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. You know what those are? The Great Commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. The Great Commission is go tell my story and make disciples. Imagine a church whose eyes are fixed on the Great Commandment and the Great Commission, not fixed on how entertaining the service was, or whether or not we liked the video, or how inspiring the music was. Imagine a family whose eyes are fixed intentionally on a strong marriage and growing children, as opposed to round-the-clock entertainment and titillation and thousands of dollars to play ball all over the world. Imagine a single woman whose eyes are fixed on Jesus, not the cute new guy at the office. Imagine single men whose eyes are fixed on personal purity, not Pornhub. Imagine. You see, the things that capture our attention are going to influence our direction. And it's our direction that determines our destination. That's why it matters. Let's pray. Father, help us give our time and attention and our focus to the things that really matter. Father, light the way, reveal the path. Help us recognize the steps we're taking are in a certain direction, and that direction is being influenced by the things we've allowed to capture and grab our attention. So God, help us guard and protect our direction. Go with us this day with your blessing upon us, I pray. In the name of Jesus Christ, I ask it. Amen. God bless you, Grace Community Church. Go make it a fantastic week. I will see you next time.